Shanti sister, how are you?
Om Shanti, brother. Fine.
Okay. Today we are going to see uh, the Holy Quran, chapter 2, Al Baqarah, which means the Heifer, 114th verse. Please read it, sister.
Who is more unjust than him who forbids the remembrance of God's name in places of worship and contributes to the ruin? These ought not to enter the except in fear. For them, disgrace in this world, and for them is a terrible punishment in the hereafter.
In the hereafter. Yes. So, actually, this looks illogical to forbid remembrance of God's name in places of worship. Because obviously they will remember God in places of worship like mosque, church, temple, because that is exclusively for that. But here it actually means in home, only in home you will have a lot of problem, especially after taking the direct knowledge of Allah, God. Because you're not going to face any problem in following Quran or Bible or Srimad Bhagavad Gita because they are the book of religions or religions of books. So they are created by humans, and you won't have any obstacle in following them. Actually, there's no difficulty in following them. All you need to do is to pray. That's it. You don't have to follow anything else. You can eat anything you want. You can marry anybody whom you like, even more than once. There's absolutely no restriction. But in the direct knowledge of Allah, which is given only during the end of this 5000 year kalpa, God comes directly from his supreme abode. He enters an old man's body and he names him Brahman, and he gives this knowledge called Murali, which is available absolutely free of cost in all Brahma Kumaris Rajyog meditation centers. So he names that old man as Brahma, and this Brahma is considered Adam in Bible and Quran, because it is only Adam and Eve that resides in Quran. So the who resides in heaven. Nobody else resided in heaven. So the way to enter heaven will only be given to Adam and Eve, that is to Brahma. So that happens in the end of the world, because the first half of this 5000 year time cycle was heaven, the last half was hell, and in the last 100 years of this kalpa, God Himself comes. He doesn't send any messenger. Actually, there is no messenger of God because nobody knows the message of God. If the messenger, the so called messenger, had the message of God, then there is no need for God to come in the end. If the holy books carry the message of God, then what is God going to do by coming here? They say the second coming of Jesus, arrival of Kalki Bhagavan, but they have already come. Uh, Sri Krishna took birth in heaven in the beginning. Jesus Christ comes almost in the beginning of hell, but only God hasn't come yet. Because Jesus Christ come to establish his religion. Muhammad comes to establish his religion. Buddha comes to establish his religion because they were religious founders. They are not God's messengers. Because only God has his message and he comes directly to give his message. After listening to his knowledge from Brahma Kumaris, we start giving this knowledge to everybody. So we are the true messengers of God. Now, if you listen to the God's knowledge, which is nothing but you have to consider yourself to be the soul and not as the perishable body. It is because we considered ourselves to be the perishable body that we become slaves of sensual pleasures and five vices: lust, anger, greed, attachment, and ego. Thereby, we made this world into hell. While it was heaven, we were completely unaware of these five vices and sensual pleasures, but we were under constant pleasure that comes from within the soul. Because the soul itself is the source of pleasure and peace. So that's the true nature of soul. As long as we were soul conscious while we were in heaven, we were happy constantly. Although it was heaven, although everything gives happiness, but still we were not addicted to anything. We didn't want to take it on our own because we were content within ourselves, because we were getting that blissfulness from within. So we always consider ourselves to be souls. We interact with each other considering the other person as soul. So it is the soul that sees through the eyes, listens through the ear, speaks through the mouth, and performs all actions through the body. And the residents of heaven know it. But what happens after the first 2500 years is we slowly become body conscious instead of soul conscious. So that's when we no longer can derive happiness from within. So we seek pleasure externally. So that is something that can't last forever. It's very temporary and it is deceiving. Nonetheless, we seek pleasure from the external environment. That's how we become addicted to sensual pleasures and vices like lust, anger, greed, attachment, and ego. Under the influence of these five vices, every thought we create, every word we speak, every act we do, they all come under the category of sinful actions. That's the reason we get punished in the form of diseases, natural calamities, and yeah, all other problems like war between nations, conflict between family members, everything else. So God comes to rescue us. That's why He comes and gives this knowledge. It is because we consider ourselves to be this body that we are undergoing so much sorrow and pain. To escape this sorrow and pain, we need to focus on the soul and nothing else. But we don't have that much concentration power. So that's the reason God says, after considering yourselves to be souls, connect your mind with me, the Supreme Soul. So this Supreme Soul is called Allah by Muslims, Shiv by Hindus, Heavenly Godfather by Christians. So he doesn't take birth like us. He always is a soul. We soul shines like a tiny star in between the eyebrows, which is so tiny that we can't see either with the naked eyes or with any hi-fi scientific instrument. So it's the tiniest thing in the world. So is God. That's the reason nobody has ever seen God. But still, he needs a human body to give this knowledge. That's why he enters Brahma's body and gives this knowledge. But not everybody takes this knowledge because the main purpose of this knowledge is to make us eligible to enter heaven. How? In heaven, nobody knows what lust, anger, greed, attachment, or ego is because they were not body conscious, they were soul conscious. That is the reason God asked us to become soul conscious again, which means we have to give up on the five vices: lust, greed, anger, attachment, and ego, which nobody wants to get rid of. That's the reason only one in million take this knowledge directly from Allah. So, for example, maybe the husband takes this knowledge, wife doesn't. Or wife takes this knowledge, the husband doesn't. What would happen? So here it is by remembering God that we get the power to get rid of these external attractions, these five vices, the body conscious. So unless and until you remember God as a point of light constantly, You can never conquer five vices, especially lust. So when the wife become a Brahma Kumari, because this knowledge is given through Brahma Kumaris, if the wife becomes a Brahma Kumari and the husband doesn't, he's not going to let go of his wife just like that because he needs lust from her. That's the main reason people in hell gets married. It's like marriage, as people say, is the license for sex. So God says you need to stay pure, stay away from sex. You don't even have to see anybody lustfully. You just have to see the soul and consider that soul to be your brother, not even sister. Because brother and sister, it represents bodies, because it is only body that is male or female. Soul, all souls remain the same in appearance. It's so tiny. So God says, since everybody has the right to the kingdom of heaven, which is the inheritance of God, everybody is the son of God. Because in olden days, only sons inherit father's property. So since we all have the right to claim the kingdom of heaven, God says we are all brothers, not even sisters. So we have to look at the soul. We have to remember God as a point of light, no matter what you do. You can go, you can cook, you can take bath, you can eat, whatever you want to do. But just make sure your mind is always connected with God. That's how we conquer all vices, including lust. But obviously, the husband doesn't want his wife to follow this knowledge because he wants sex. So that's when he forbids his wife to remember God. So this represents the direct knowledge of Brahma Kumaris, the direct knowledge of Allah, not Quran or Bible or Bhagavad Gita, because no religion forbids sex. It's only God who says, if you have sex, you can't enter heaven. That's why Jesus Christ says, unless and until you become as pure as a newborn child, you can't enter heaven. The main difference between the child and the adults is children do not know anything about sex, but the adults do. So that's why God makes us as pure as Himself. So if somebody forbids his wife or husband or his kids from remembering God or from reading this knowledge of God, which is called Murli, then they they are the unjust. They contribute to their own ruin. They destroy themselves. God says they will be severely punished. Even now, during the day of judgment, they will be punished intensely. And if at all he takes this knowledge by any chance in the end, he will be given the lowest status of the servant or maid in heaven. So that is also a punishment for them. So that is what it actually represents, the, according to the true knowledge of Allah. So it doesn't mean, so no Muslim family, anyway Muslim is going to marry a Muslim girl or guy. Why are they, even if the husband doesn't believe in God, he will encourage his wife to believe in God. Only then she will be faithful to him. Only then she will follow putting hijab. So that saves him trouble of her having illegal affair with another. So it actually favors male. So they are not going to put any restriction against his wife. But the restriction comes only when the girl says no to sex. That happens only when you listen to the direct knowledge of Allah. Which is why even in Bible, Jesus Christ says, if you see a woman lustfully, you have already committed prostitution with her. He didn't say if you see a woman other than your wife lustfully, it is prostitution. He just said if you see a woman, any woman, including your wife, but we don't want to listen to that. So we change it according to our wishes. So that's the thing. So that's the meaning of this 114th verse, sisters. And go on with 150. Okay, sister. 115th verse.
To God belong the east and the west. Whichever way you turn, there is God's presence. God is omnipresent and omniscient.
Yeah, that's true. So this actually goes totally against the Muslim style of worship because they have this particular way of bowing in a particular direction, that is towards the direction of Mecca. Because Muhammad did it, they just do it. That's it. Okay. But God asks, am I present only in Mecca? Only in that direction am I present? No, he says, God, for God, all direction belongs to him, whether it's east, west, north, south, everything. Wherever you turn, you will see God because God is omnipresent, which means he is present everywhere. Omniscient means he knows everything. So this is what all religions says. Not only Quran, all religions says. But all religions, as we already said, were created by humans, not by God. God has nothing to do with any religion. So God's way is entirely different from humans' way. So what does God say? God says, I'm not omnipresent. Did I ever say I'm omnipresent? How do you know I'm omnipresent? Nobody has ever seen me. How do they know I'm omnipresent? If I'm everywhere, God is great, then everything should be great. And does the world look great now in Palestine, in Ukraine, in every part of the world? We see all kind of sexual assaults, especially in India and everywhere. And we see natural calamities, everything happening. And people's characters, we just can't imagine. It's so dangerous. People have become so selfish. If God is everywhere, it means God is within us, within everybody, which means everybody is God. That's what Hindus say. So they say not everybody is God. God is the creator. Everybody else is the creation of God. That's what Muslims believe. But this particular verse says God is in everyone. That is what it means. God is omnipresent. If He is everywhere, which means He is also within me, outside me. So it's same as Hindu belief, but God is not everywhere. But uh, actually, no religion is the word of God, but God's word is there in every religion to some extent. Not everything is God's word. So especially when it comes to Bible, Old Testament, when Solomon says he always, after building his first temple, which is the main root cause of all problems between Christians and Muslims and Jews. So after finishing that temple, he says, whenever he addresses God, he says, the resident of the supreme abode, which proves he is not everywhere. He is there, not here, not everywhere. So that's the thing. This is the place of God. Not only for God, even for souls, this is the place of residence. This is called the soul world or the Parandam or Parlok. This is where God resides all the time. Even we souls reside there. The only difference between God and souls is we take birth in heaven in the beginning, and we undergo rebirth after rebirth until we reach the end. Then God comes. Even then, He doesn't take birth like we do through a mother's womb. Instead, He enters an old man's body directly and gives this knowledge. So that's the main difference between God and us. If He's everywhere, then how can He give this knowledge? How can He give this knowledge? He has to be somewhere, only then He can come and give this knowledge, right? So if He is everywhere, then nothing that happens in this world can be considered sin. Because if God is everywhere, God is doing everything. So nobody knows that. Although it's very simple, even atheists can understand this. Unfortunately, no religion can understand the main mistake in their belief system. God is not everywhere, but there is God. He comes and He makes this hell into heaven, which is something that can never be done by any human or religious founder. That is the reason glory to only God, not to Jesus or Muhammad or Jibril or Christ or Buddha. Nobody has any glory because after their arrival, after their knowledge, the world still goes down into the gutter. See the condition of the world. We have innumerable religions. As a result, the world has become like that. But God comes, gives His direction to make it into heaven, not to create another religion. So, for that, God has to come. For that, God will not be omnipresent. And does He know everything? Does He know what I think? Does He know what you think? Does He know what everybody thinks? God says, no. Why should I know about what waste thoughts you have? Only you have to know what God's mind has. Because God's mind has the knowledge to purify ourselves, to make us into deities. So only we need to understand His knowledge. He doesn't have to understand anything we have because whatever we have, they are just worthless. Only God's knowledge is worth receiving by everybody. Everybody has the right to God's knowledge. So that proves God is not omnipresent. God is not everywhere. No matter which way you pray, it doesn't matter because God comes only in the end. Till then, no matter how loudly you cry, He is not going to listen while He was there. He was totally unconscious. Only towards the end, God comes and gives this knowledge and fills us with all the power that is needed for us to take rebirth after rebirth for the next 5,000 years. So He fills us with everything and He leaves just in this 100 years. So even now, after the arrival of God, God is now here giving this knowledge. Even now, if you cry, God doesn't bother because you don't bother God. You don't bother listening to God's knowledge. Why should He bother you? You listen to the dictates of humans, which is the dictates of Satan. Only two directions. One is the direction of God, which is given directly by God in the end. Till then, we've been following only the human dictates, which is not wrong on our part because we didn't know about God. But now God Himself has come. If we still reject the direction of God, it is purely our fault and not God's fault.